Okay, so before we get started today, just a quick heads up. This entire deep dive, everything we're going to be talking about, it was all researched by that new AI model, the O3 Deep Research one.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
Pretty wild, huh? This whole deep dive, it's fully AI generated, all the research, the whole thing. But anyway, what we're really diving into today is, well, this one essay actually, but it's a really interesting one. It gets into this huge question like, will artificial intelligence actually, you know, govern us one day? Like really govern us? It's kind of mind-blowing,
It
right?
is, yeah. We're seeing AI being used more and more, but actually governing, that's a whole other level.
Totally. So this essay, it kind of looks at like, could AI go beyond just, you know, helping governments do their thing to actually making big decisions, like
Right.
really important policy stuff, or even like directly running
You know what
things?
that would mean for democracy, right? Like,
Yeah.
how would that even work?
Exactly. I mean, it used to be just a sci-fi thing, but now people are seriously talking about it. So this essay, it takes a real close look at like the experiments happening right now with AI and government, and then it kind of goes into the future. Yeah. What could happen down the line?
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so let's just jump right in.
Okay.
So the essay kicks off with this crazy story from back in 2025. You remember all that talk about those Trump trade tariffs?
Oh, yeah. Those were controversial, to say the least.
For sure. Well, there was this whole rumor going around that those tariffs, they were actually cooked up by AI.
Crazy, right?
Wow, that's the first I'm hearing of that.
Yeah, it was a big thing at the time. So just to refresh our memories, can you remind us, like, what were those tariffs all about in the first place? Okay, so the tariffs were, they were called reciprocal trade measures. The idea was, to push for fair trade deals with other countries. But what really got economists and, our trading partners scratching their heads was the way they calculated those tariffs. It seemed, well, kind of strange. Definitely not the usual complicated economic models you'd expect.
Yeah, it was way too simple for such a big deal.
Well, that's right.
So the essay actually breaks down the formula they were using. What was it exactly?
Well, it seems like they started with a basic 10% tariff on everything we imported. And then on top of that, for countries with a big trade deficit with us, they slapped on an extra tariff. And the way they calculated that extra bit, it was weird.
How so?
Okay, so get this. They took the total trade deficit with a country, divided that by the total value stuff we imported from that country, and then took half of that number.
Half.
Seriously.
That's what it looked like.
I mean, that's just like back of the napkin math for something that impacts like the entire global economy. Exactly. And this guy, economist James Surowiecki, he totally called them out on it. The essay says he basically called it extraordinary nonsense. He was like, this ignores everything about how trade actually works. Existing tariffs, all those non-tariff barriers, global supply chains, the whole nine yards. It was just too basic, didn't reflect the real world at all.
Okay, I get that part. But how did this simple formula then lead to this whole AI rumor? Like, how did people even make that connection?
All right, so this is where it gets really interesting. After everyone realized how basic this formula was, people started messing around with those AI chatbots, the ones everyone was using back then, like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini.
Oh, yeah, those were everywhere.
Totally. So people would ask them, like, hey, how should the U.S. calculate tariffs to wipe out its trade deficit with each country? Just casual questions like that.
And what happened?
The crazy part is those AI chatbots, they often spit out answers that were super close to the formula the Trump administration was using, like scarily close.
No.
Yeah. The essay mentions this cryptocurrency guy, Kobe. He asked ChatGPT to come up with a tariff plan, and guess what? It suggested a 10% baseline tariff. Like, the whole plan ChatGPT came up with, it was basically a mirror image of what the White House was doing, and apparently a lot of people were getting similar results from different AIs. It was all over social media.
Spooky. So all these different AI models, they were all coming up with the same basic idea.
Very much, yeah.
But were they just like throwing out this simple formula without any warnings? Like, hey, this might not be the best idea in the real world.
Well, some of them did actually give some caveats. Some of the AIs were like, hold on, you can't just ignore how complex global trade is. You've got supply chains, potential retaliation from other countries, stuff like that. So some of the AIs, they seem to get that this formula was kind of simplistic.
Still kind of freaky though, right? Like, what if they hadn't given those warnings?
Yeah, it definitely makes you think.
Okay, so back to this story. How did everyone react to this whole AI tariffs thing? I can only imagine the internet went nuts.
Oh, it did. It was a total mix of like people laughing their heads off and people being genuinely freaked out. Social media was full of jokes, memes, you name it. Some people were calling them the AI-generated tariffs. It was like either this is so ridiculous it can't be true, or this is terrifying if it is true.
I bet the news had a field day with it.
Oh, totally. Newsweek, The Verge, they all covered it. Everyone was pointing out how similar the White House's formula was to what the AIs were suggesting. Of course, nobody had any real proof that AI was actually involved, but the coincidence was just too crazy to ignore.
Okay, so what did the White House say about all of this? They couldn't just stay silent, right?
Well, they ended up releasing a much more complicated looking formula. Like, I guess they wanted to look like they had actually done some serious analysis. But even that fancy version, if you look closely, it still seemed to be based on that same basic ratio of trade deficit to imports.
So they were sticking to their guns.
Yeah, they kept saying, nope, human advisors came up with this. We considered all the complexities. But the numbers, they didn't really back that up.
Interesting. The essay also mentions Elon Musk, right? Wasn't he involved somehow?
Yeah, he was an advisor to the administration at the time. And apparently came up with similar tariff ideas, too. So that just added fuel to the fire, you know? People were like, okay, this is getting too weird.
Totally. Though the essay does point out that Trump always talked about those reciprocal tariffs, so maybe the formula was just like a really basic way of putting that idea into action.
True. And the White House always denied that AI had anything to do with it.
Plus, the essay argues, if they were really listening to AI and like using its full power, the policy probably would have been way more sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, even some of the chat bots were giving warnings about oversimplification. If a real AI was calling the shots, you'd think it would have come up with something a lot more nuanced.
So what's the takeaway from this whole AI tariffs thing, even if it was just a rumor? Like, what does it tell us about how people think about AI and government?
I think the main thing is, whether it was true or not, it showed that people are starting to believe that AI could actually influence government policy. Like, it was a real test of how society reacts to this idea of AI governance. And even though most economists thought the tariffs were a bad idea, the fact that this AI rumor took off like it did, it shows that the public's perception of AI is changing. They're starting to see it as a real player in the game.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
So moving on from that wild story, the essay then gets into, like, how AI is actually being used in government right now. Not in this super dramatic, headline-grabbing way, but in more subtle, behind-the-scenes ways.
Yeah, it's happening in areas like public services administration, law enforcement, policy analysis. It's not always front-page news, but it's having a real impact on how governments work and how people interact with them.
Right. So let's start with public services and administration. The essay talks about Singapore's Smart Nation initiative and those AI virtual assistants they have. What's the deal with those?
Okay, so Singapore, they're really all in on using tech to make their government better. This Smart Nation thing, it's all about using digital tools, AI included, to improve life in the city and make public services super convenient.
So, like, what does that look like for everyday people?
Well, they have these AI-powered virtual assistants, like this one called Ask Jamie. You can basically chat with it using text or voice and get stuff done with the government, like renewing licenses, registering businesses, all that kind of stuff. It's way easier than trying to figure out some clunky government website.
That does sound a lot smoother. And it's not just Singapore, right, that the essay says other countries are doing this too.
Oh yeah, for sure. Portugal has a chatbot in their justice ministry for answering basic legal questions. India's using AI chatbots for their payment system, to make transactions quicker. Saudi Arabia has them on their e-government portal. And Estonia, they're really going for it with their Karat AI strategy. They're trying to create this whole network of AI chatbots that can talk to each other across different parts of the government. They've already got over 100 AI pilot projects running.
Wow, 100? That's a lot. So it's not just about getting information, right? They're using AI for more complex stuff, too. Like the essay mentioned something about Argentina's court system.
Yeah, they're using this AI called Promedia in Buenos Aires. It's actually being used to predict how some basic court cases are going to turn out, and it can even draft up initial versions of rulings.
Whoa, an AI judge.
Well, not exactly a judge, but it helps the judges. And apparently it's pretty accurate. They're saying it's right about 96% of the time. And it's made those simple cases get resolved way faster.
That's impressive. And what about things like, inspections and maintenance? Can AI help with that stuff?
Definitely. Cities are starting to use AI to make those things more efficient. Like New York and Chicago are using AI to decide which buildings and restaurants need to be inspected first, based on the likelihood of finding violations. And Pittsburgh, they have this AI-powered traffic light system called SurTrack. It adjusts the timings of the lights based on traffic flow, and it's led to way shorter travel times, less idling, and even fewer emissions.
So AI is literally helping cities breathe easier.
Yeah.
And it's not just at the city level, right? National governments are getting in on this too.
Absolutely. In the U.S., the Department of Health and Human Services is using AI to catch Medicare fraud, and the VA uses it to figure out which veterans need health care the most urgently. Canada and Brazil are both using AI to crack down on tax evasion and stuff like that. It's really spreading across all levels of government.
The essay lists some of the countries that are really leading the way in all of this. Who are the big players?
Well, Singapore and Estonia, they're always mentioned as frontrunners. They've got a clear vision for how they want to use AI, and they've built up the tech infrastructure to support it. The UAE is another one to watch. They've even got a whole minister dedicated to AI. And then there's China. They're using AI in a lot of different ways, though they're more focused on state control. And you've got countries in Northern Europe like Denmark, Finland, and the Netherlands, along with Uruguay and Brazil in South America. They're all actively exploring AI in different parts of their governments.
Okay, so now for a more, let's say, touchy subject.
Yeah.
AI in law enforcement and surveillance, that's where things get a little more ethically complicated, right?
Yeah, for sure. The essay doesn't shy away from those issues, like facial recognition technology. It's being used in China, the US, the UK, India, all over the place. But there's a lot of debate about whether it's, invading people's privacy and threatening civil liberties.
Yeah, facial recognition always seems to be in the news for the wrong reasons.
Right. And then you have those predictive policing algorithms. They were supposed to help police decide where to focus their efforts, but they often ended up just reinforcing existing biases in crime data. So a lot of those programs have been shut down.
The essay mentions some really bad examples of people being wrongly arrested in the U.S. because of facial recognition.
Yeah, there's this guy, Robert Williams, in Detroit. He was arrested because facial recognition software misidentified him. And there have been other cases, too. The problem is these systems, they tend to be less accurate when it comes to people with darker skin tones. It's led to lawsuits, and some cities, like San Francisco and Boston, have actually banned the government from using facial recognition.
It's a real reminder that this tech, it's not perfect.
Right.
And it can have serious consequences when it gets things wrong.
Absolutely. And it's not just facial recognition. There are also concerns about those risk assessment algorithms they use in some courts.
Oh, yeah, like that compass system, right?
Right. It's supposed to help judges decide how likely someone is to commit another crime. But ProPublica did an investigation, and they found that it was biased against Black defendants. It gave them higher risk scores, even when they had similar criminal histories to white defendants. So now there's a lot of pushback against using those kinds of algorithms in the justice system. And people are saying, hold on, this isn't fair.
Yeah, if an algorithm is going to influence someone's freedom, it better be darn well unbiased.
Exactly. And the essay also touches on AI being used in national security, immigration, and border control. They even talk about the EU experimenting with AI lie detectors.
AI lie detectors, what are those?
Well, it's this project the EU was working on called iBorderCrucial. The idea was to use AI to analyze people's facial expressions at border crossings, to see if they were lying. But a lot of experts were skeptical, saying it's not really reliable and it raises a lot of ethical questions.
Yeah, I can see how that would be controversial.
And then there's the use of AI in, surveillance drones, automated monitoring systems at borders, that kind of stuff. It's a whole other can of worms.
Okay, so moving away from those more, let's say, attention-grabbing examples, the essay talks about AI being used for policy analysis and decision-making. That seems like a quieter but maybe even more impactful role for AI.
Definitely. I mean, think about it. AI can help governments analyze tons of data, spot trends, and make more informed decisions. It's already being used for economic forecasting, like predicting crop yields or figuring out the impact of different financial policies.
So it's like having a superpowered research assistant.
Kind of, yeah. And in legislatures, they're looking at using AI to draft laws, summarize reports, and even analyze feedback from citizens. It could make the whole legislative process more efficient and maybe even more responsive to people's needs.
That's interesting. And I remember the essay mentioned AI being used in courtrooms, not just for those risk assessments we talked about, but also for research.
Right. There are AI systems, like the EU's AI4J and one called Victor in Brazil that help judges do legal research and organize cases. It's especially helpful in those higher courts where they have tons of cases to deal with.
So AI is basically becoming a lawyer's best friend. What I found really cool was the idea of using AI simulations to test out different policy options before actually putting them into practice.
Yeah, that's called policy experimentation. Governments in New Zealand and Canada are doing that with things like urban planning and housing markets. They create these virtual models, and then they can see how different policies would play out. It's a way of testing the waters before making any big, real-world changes.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so earlier we talked about those countries that are leading the way in AI adoption, but the essay brings that up again when it talks about public awareness and some of the big scandals that have happened, like the Netherlands' Siri and Australia's robo-debt. Those seem like cautionary tales about what can go wrong.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, Singapore, Estonia, the UAE, China, those countries are all pushing ahead with AI, but there's a lot of variation in how aware the public is of what's going on. And then you have cases like Siri and robo-debt, where AI systems were used in ways that were really harmful to people. It shows that we need to be really careful about how we implement this technology, especially when it comes to things like welfare and people's livelihoods.
Can you remind us what happened with those systems and why people were so upset about them?
So in the Netherlands, they had this system called Siri, and it was supposed to catch people who were cheating the welfare system. But it ended up targeting people in poor neighborhoods and immigrant communities. It was like they were assuming that these people were more likely to be committing fraud.
Yeah.
And the way it worked, it was really opaque, so people didn't even know how the system was making decisions about them. The courts ended up ruling that Siri was illegal because it violated people's privacy and the right to equal treatment.
And what about robo-debt in Australia?
That one was a total mess. Basically, they had this automated system that was supposed to find people who owed money to the government for welfare overpayments. But the system was flawed, and it ended up sending out debt notices to people who didn't actually owe anything. It caused a ton of stress and hardship for a lot of people. There were lawsuits, a huge public outcry, and eventually the government had to admit that the system was unlawful. They ended up having to pay back millions of dollars to people who had been wrongly accused of owing money.
It's a good reminder that AI systems, they're only as good as the data they're trained on. And if the data is biased or the system isn't designed properly, it can have really serious consequences.
For sure. And it really erodes people's trust in the government when these things happen.
The essay also talks about how people in democracies feel about AI in general. It seems like there's a lot of mixed feelings.
Yeah, it's complicated. On the one hand, people see the potential for AI to make government more efficient, provide better services, that kind of thing. But on the other hand, they're worried about fairness, accountability, and whether we're losing too much control to machines.
So it's like a trade-off between the potential benefits and the potential risks.
Exactly. And the polls show that people's opinions are all over the place. Some people are really open to the idea of AI advising the government, but others are more hesitant. It really depends on the specific application of AI and how transparent it is. A lot of people are like, as long as humans are still in control and we understand how the AI is making decisions, then I'm okay with it.
That makes sense. And there have been some high-profile cases in the UK, like that exam grading algorithm scandal, where the public really pushed back against AI being used in a way that they felt was unfair.
Yeah, that was a big deal. It showed that people are willing to speak up and demand accountability when they feel like AI is being used in a way that's not right. And it also highlighted the importance of having clear regulations in place for how AI is used in government. The EU's AI Act, that's a good example of that. They're trying to set some ground rules to make sure that AI is used responsibly.
Okay, so the last part of the essay gets into the future. Like, what happens if AI starts playing an even bigger role in government? Could it actually start making decisions for us?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting and a little bit scary, to be honest. The essay explores the idea that AI could eventually become the main advisor to governments, maybe even replacing those human think tanks and experts that currently provide policy advice.
Whoa, so like instead of going to a panel of experts, politicians would just ask an AI what to do.
That's the idea. And the essay raises some really important questions about what that would mean for democracy. Like, if we always follow the AI's advice, does that mean we stop having real debates about different policy options? And who gets to decide what values and priorities the AI is programmed with? Those are human decisions, and they're at the heart of what democracy is all about.
Yeah, that makes sense. The essay also makes a point of saying that AI doesn't have all the answers,
Right.
right? Like it can't just tell us the absolute truth about what the best policy is.
Right. I mean, a lot of policy decisions are about balancing different priorities, dealing with trade-offs, and thinking about unintended consequences. An AI might be able to tell you the most efficient solution based on data, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best solution for everyone, or that it takes into account all the ethical considerations.
And the essay actually uses the word algocracy, right? Like rule by algorithms.
Right. Yeah, it's a bit of a scary thought, but it's a real possibility. We have to be careful that we don't just hand over all the decision-making power to AI, because then we risk losing the human element, the values, the debates, all the things that make democracy work.
Okay, so this next part is kind of wild. The essay talks about the idea of having multiple AI systems with different political leanings. Like, imagine a Democrat GPT and a Republican GPT.
I know, right? It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's actually a pretty interesting idea. Researchers have shown that you can actually tune these AI language models to reflect specific viewpoints. So you could have an AI that's programmed with liberal values and another one that's programmed with conservative values.
And then what? They just argue with each other all day.
Well, maybe. But the essay suggests that it could actually lead to more informed and data-driven debates. Like, instead of just arguing based on ideology, politicians could use their respective AIs to present evidence and arguments that are backed up by data.
It's like, my AI is smarter than your AI.
Kind of, yeah. Though there's also the risk that it just becomes a battle of the algorithms, where it's really hard for regular people to follow what's going on.
That's a good point. It could end up being really confusing for voters.
Exactly. And then there's the question of how the public would feel about all of this. Would they trust these AI systems? Would they feel like their voices are still being heard?
The essay talks about that too, right? Like how public opinion might shift as AI becomes more involved in government.
Yeah, it's hard to predict how people will react. I mean, if AI starts delivering real results like improving the economy or making government services more efficient, then maybe people will become more accepting of it. But if there are big failures or if people feel like AI is being used in a way that's unfair or biased, then there could be a backlash.
And transparency is going to be super important, right? Like people need to understand how these AI systems are working and who's controlling them.
Totally. If people feel like AI is just this black box that's making decisions without any accountability, then they're not going to trust it. And that could lead to a real loss of faith in democracy itself.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about how we use it and how we make sure it serves the people.
Exactly. And it's about having a constant conversation with the public, explaining what's happening, getting their feedback, and making sure they feel like they're part of the process.
Okay, so to wrap things up, the essay ends by outlining the potential opportunities and risks of AI-driven governance. We've touched on a lot of these already, but it's good to have them all in one place.
Right. So on the positive side, AI could make government way more efficient and responsive. It could help us make better policy decisions, personalize services, reduce bias, and even save money. There's potential for AI to make government more transparent and accountable, too.
So like a superpowered government that works for everyone.
Well, that's the hope anyway. But there are also some serious risks. Like, if we're not careful, AI could end up reinforcing existing biases and inequalities. It could make government even more opaque and unaccountable. And we have to be careful that we don't become so reliant on AI that we lose essential human skills and judgment.
So it's like any powerful tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
Exactly. And the essay emphasizes that it's up to us as a society to decide how we want to use this technology. We need to be really thoughtful about it and make sure that we're using AI in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From those crazy AI tariffs to the idea of a future where AI is advising or even making decisions for governments. It's clear that AI is already having a real impact on how we're governed, and that impact is only going to grow in the years to come.
Yeah, it's a really exciting and also a little bit unsettling time. We're on the cusp of a major shift in how our societies function.
The big question is, will we use this technology wisely? Will we make sure that it serves human needs and democratic values?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that we all need to be thinking about and talking about.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good place to leave it for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the future of AI and governance. It's definitely something to keep thinking about, and we encourage you to check out the sources mentioned in the essay if you want to explore these ideas further.
And remember, the future of AI is not something that's just happening to us. It's something that we're all creating together. So let's make sure we create a future that we can all be proud of.
Well said. Thanks again for listening.